All right, so I will go ahead and get started then. Tokia yanadeo miyan Kekan San, miwile pana e sona pi ilo muni. Onali sona wawa e mute nimi lon tempo. Hey everybody, I'm Greg Den3, and today we are going to talk about my new tool, Ilo Muni, Pi Mute Nimi. That is a tool called Muni, all about how many words there are. So the idea is this. It's like Google Ngrams, and if you're not familiar, that's a tool, a project by Google, which lets you know how many words there are in a given time period, or rather, excuse me, let me rephrase that. What portion of all words are a given word over time? And so you can see trends in language. Now, that project has all sorts of different complexities and difficulties with interpretation, but, so does this one. So we are going to go ahead and open up with the plan. We're going to talk about what even is going on, how did I get all the data, how I tell if a message is in Tokipona. We're going to look at graphs for a little while. We're finally going to reveal what the deal is with the dip. Talk about why I did all this, couple of closing thoughts, and then I will be handing everybody the keys to Ilo Muni so you can run your own queries and see different word frequencies yourself. So, what am I even talking about? What is an ingram? It's basically just one or more words. The word phrase is close enough to this idea. If you have a sentence and you break it up into just its words, you get all the unigrams. That is, ingrams of length 1. But then if you wanted to look at phrases of length 2, those are bigrams, you check all the overlapping ones. So in this example, we have this is a sentence, all the individual words. For length 2, we have this is, and then is a, and then a sentence. Same goes for length 3, and this goes on as long as you want, but I'll give you a hint. You don't want it to go on for too long because, that's a nasty combinatorics problem. The more words you keep track of at once, the more ways there are to arrange them, and therefore, the bigger your data is. So for my purposes, we only go up to 6 words in an ingram, a phrase. Continuing, how did I get all of the data? This is from Discord, Telegram, and Reddit right now. I'd like to add more in the future. On Discord, Jan Kitami does an excellent job of keeping track of all the communities on Discord, so I followed along with his phenomenal work and did a little bit of exploring on my own. I actually ended up contributing to that project quite a bit. As for Telegram, it's pretty easy to find all of the Telegram communities with Telegram's global search feature. If you just search the words Tokipona or Kulupu or Ma on Telegram's global search, it will just pop up all the public communities you can find. And then lastly, there's Reddit. So Reddit is kind of complicated. You can't download data from Reddit super easily anymore because, of course, they shut down the API and now it's behind a paywall. But there are ongoing efforts to archive everything on Reddit, which have continued even after the API was pushed behind a paywall. So, thanks to them, I was able to get all of the data from r/Tokipona in particular. And that, as a caveat, only goes through the end of 2023, not because there isn't more data, there is, but because the current archive, or the archives that's specific to r/Tokipona is only made once per year, which is fair. It's an enormous amount of data to dig through. Quick little aside, all the communities in my study are public communities. I do not include any private communities like friend servers. It must be a public community of some sort. All right, so continuing. How do I tell if a message is in Tokipona? If you looked at this and said, ow, my brain, that's fair. This is the block of configuration that I use to tell my library what to do. And it is a library. I wrote a library. The link is in the bottom right. It's called Sonatoki, Language Knowledge. You could, if you wanted to do some silly stuff, repurpose it for most languages, I think. Although it wouldn't be able to tell you this is definitely one language versus another. It would only tell you this is this specific language, or it is not. In this case, I have, of course, configured it to work on Tokipona. So the corpus config here has the preprocessors. Those are just things we ignore. So we don't care about emojis, anything in backticks. That's a little tiny dot in the upper left of your keyboard. We don't care about URLs, anything in angle brackets, which are mostly Discord's emotes. And we don't care about references, which are things in double square brackets. Then cleaners. We remove all consecutive duplicates. So if somebody says something like Toki, that just gets read as Toki, T-O-K-I, instead of having all the duplicate letters along the way. Ignoring filters. We don't care about numbers, although I may add that back in the future. I may just like make it to where we don't score against them, but we include them in the data. And of course, we don't care about punctuation because that's how we tell what things are or are not words, right? That's how we separate words and sentences from one another. Then we get to the actual meat of this scoring algorithm. So scoring filters. We have this big block inside of a thing called OR. Nimi, Linku Core, Common, Uncommon, Obscure, Sandbox, Use Caesar, and Miscellaneous. Wow. Okay. So the way this works, I'll describe simply, is if something is known to my dictionary, that is this top group, then it gets the highest possible score. That individual word scores a 1. And for the purpose of the corpus specifically, that is everything, including the sandbox, although I will note that I had to remove a couple of specific words from it because they were phonotactic matches with words in other languages. Kind of a pain. I note that in way, way more detail on the site for Muni, which, like I said, you'll get access to that by the end of the talk. But we have everything in Linku. We have all the Use Caesar words, that is the funky Unicode-ish encoding of Sitalenpona. And then we have miscellaneous, which is a handful of things like acronyms that aren't not Tokipona, but they're around. Next part of the scoring algorithm. So we have long syllabic. That is, something has to be a syllabic match for Tokipona. So it has to be structured like a Tokipona word. You can't have consonants next to each other. You can't have vowels next to each other. The word has to, it can only have consecutive consonants if you have an in there. You know the rules. You've seen the syllable charts and all that. The reason it's a long syllabic is because it needs to be at least 3 letters. I'll get to the justification behind that in a bit. But then there's this next part, not false positive syllabic. So this part basically means it has to be some syllabic match, but it can't be in this list of false positives. Now, the list of false positives are basically just words in English, French, Spanish, Italian that look like Tokipona words and are really common in those languages, but are not. That's all that's doing there. Then we have long proper name. Long proper name requires it to be at least 2 letters long. To be frank, I've never seen somebody who uses an individual letter to make it part of their name. That's not impossible, and there are other means by which this would still count anyway, so that probably wouldn't be a problem if somebody did do that. But, you know, at least 2 letters. And then lastly, long alphabetic. So if all the other filters have failed up to this point, it's still possible for something to match with a fairly low score, but not a score of 0, if it is made of all of the letters in Tokipona's alphabet and nothing else. So if you do TPTPT, short for Tempo pi Tokipona Taso, then it would match that filter. Same goes for MPPTP, Mapona pi Tokipona. Lastly, we have the scorer and the passing score. The score soft scaling is the basic idea of like every member of the scoring filter is ordered. So you go from highest scoring in the dictionary to next highest. It's a phonotactic match to proper names, next highest, and lastly, alphabetic. Lowest scoring, but not 0, right? If it doesn't match any of these, then it's, of course, a 0. And then the passing score, 0.8. That's just a constant. It's me going, yeah, this seems right. But it's not literally me just going, yeah, that seems right. I spent a fair amount of time tuning that number such that certain things would be allowable. Like, it's possible to say a handful of phonotactically valid words. It's possible to say a couple of names. It's possible, of course, to say all of those things among a bunch of dictionary words. This passing score makes it to where I correctly identify things that are definitely Tokipona and don't accidentally identify things that are not Tokipona. The soft there on soft scaling just means that I'm a little bit more kind to messages which are short. If there's a short message, then I try to make it, I try to raise its score a little bit to make it more fair. So what does all of that mean? The idea is that we are kind of doing our best to identify a Tokipona message under the assumption that we probably know all of the words that are likely to be in it. And if we don't know all of the words, there's a couple of specific ways those words would appear. And ultimately, the scoring algorithm does do a pretty good job of correctly identifying Tokipona while rejecting things that aren't Tokipona. If you've ever interacted with my bot, Ilo Pitokipona Taso, that one uses this algorithm, well, not this exact one, a very similar one, and you probably find it pretty difficult to just say whatever you want while using that bot. There are ways to do it, but they involve doing things you already knew you could do, like, you know, hiding your message under a spoiler or in a quote, right? There's not any way to write a message that lets you just say whatever you want. Well, okay, there is one way, but I'm not going to discuss that right now. It's not really super important. All right, continuing. All of my code is open source. I consider this an absolute necessity for the project that I'm doing. Everything I have done up to this point is open source. You can review all of it. You can see that the steps I've taken are as I described them, and you can determine for yourself how fair, apt, correct, whatever they are. All of the steps I take with each of these libraries is documented, and you can contribute. I have opened issues on at least 2 out of 3 of these that describe future work that I'd like to get done. So if you are a software developer, if you are familiar with Python or TypeScript, please feel free to contribute. I would absolutely love the help. Continuing. Quick aside. So I use this library in Muni itself to send you the data. It is called SQL.js-HTTP VFS. I love this library. It's not only doing an incredibly cool thing, but it is also named after 4 acronyms that are all different things that are all connected differently. It is the structured query language in JavaScript via a hypertext transfer protocol virtual file system. I love this. This feels like the kind of thing that would make Jan Miseli giggle. I think this is hysterical. Anyway, that's not important. It's just kind of fun. Graphs. Okay, so this is the part where we actually look at Muni. So let me close this, and we're going to hop over to the actual site. Now, this isn't the actual site. I'm currently running this locally. The actual site is up and available. And I assume you can see it on the stream, right? It should be up. Whew. Okay. So, oh my, somebody's posted all the links. Cool. All right, I need to pull up my little guide here so I can show you the interesting queries, because of course, once I get to the tool, I immediately forget all of the cool queries I thought of. So yeah, Muni. If you have seen Google Ngrams, this is going to be a pretty familiar interface, but there's a couple more options and a couple more things you can do. than as compared to Elo or as compared to Google Ngrams. But it's doing fundamentally the same thing. It's showing you how the usage of words has changed over time. So when you put your cursor over the graph in any particular place, it shows you, hey, this percentage of, or this word is whatever percentage of all words. Somebody's asking, can I read the chat? Yes, I can read the chat. I will have some time for suggestions, to take questions, and of course, at the end of this chat, I will be giving everybody a link to Elo Muni. Excuse me. I see some people have already found the link. It is already live technically. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and continue because there's a lot to discuss as far as like how this tool works, how to interpret the data, etc. Whenever you load the tool for the first time, we're going to hit the search button here. It pops up a random sample search that kind of gives you an idea of how the tool works. I'm going to turn off smoothing here. Here we see our first example of silly things happening. So one sunny day in October of 2021, somebody decided they would say the word ale like hundreds of times, maybe thousands. Let's go with thousands. Silly things like this happen occasionally, particularly to the number words. But overall, things are quite sensible. We're going to spend most of our time looking at the relative graphs, though, because that's where we're going to find most of the interesting data, most of the things to learn about how Tokipona is used. So let me start with something relatively simple. If we search for the word Toki and the word Pona, we of course get a graph showing us how frequently those words are used over time compared to all the other words. And we can see that occasionally Toki is number one and occasionally Pona is number one. It's actually number one for most of the time. But we can look at this data in a couple of different ways. So for example, I can switch to the absolute mode. Absolute just shows us the actual literal number of times that word was seen in all of this data. This, of course, isn't all that helpful because it really only shows us, how busy the community has been. It doesn't really tell us anything about the words themselves. In relative mode, we can see interesting things like, both of these are trending downward as time goes on. And I have thoughts about that, but I don't, of course, have anything in the way of like, this is definitely what happened. And that's going to be a theme with everything Elo Muni related. I really cannot just like magically know what happened. There are some cases where I can know that, and I'd like to show you one actually. So one of the cool things you can do with Elo Muni is see periodic phrases. For example, Tenpo Monsuta. Now, let me turn off the smoothing to make it a little bit more clear what's going on. October of 2018, Tenpo Monsuta pops up. 2019 pops up in October. October, 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 October. It turns out people talk a lot about Tenpo Monsuta in the middle of October. That's pretty cool, right? And it's, of course, pretty clear why that happens. But this isn't the only phrase that comes back over time. For example, there's Tenpo Pana. This is a similar thing. So December 2020, Tenpo Pana. December 21, December 22, December 23. This is a way people talk about Christmas, a giving time. And just for fun, Suno pi toki pona. Hey, look at that one. That one's actually periodic as well. It comes back every so often. And we can, of course, switch to the absolute mode to see the number of times. August 2021, 22, and 23. And of course, we see a little bit of lead up every single time where people are talking about it a bit early to get the planning done. And this data goes all the way to July, where you can see the same thing going on. This data doesn't go through to August because it is currently August. So I don't have that data complete yet. I hope it's clear why that's the case. But that's just the ability to search like a word or a phrase. Like we could go look for all the color words. Lasso, loye, yellow, walo, bimea. Pop that into the relative mode, and we can see mostly that the data is really noisy. We can see a couple of interesting things, like pimea is reliably more frequent than the rest of the other color words. Well, you might have a guess for why that's the case. That being, oh, people talk about tempo pimea a lot, right? Well, what if we wanted to correct for that? Now we can do subtraction. So what I've done here, pimea minus tempo pimea, is to remove all the occurrences of tempo pimea from occurrences of pimea. I hope that makes sense. And what we get, the result, is that all of the remaining occurrences of pimea are much closer to being in line with the rest of the color words. Now, this isn't a perfect magic bullet. Obviously, there are plenty of ways that the word pimea could be used to refer to tempo pimea without the word tempo leading it, right? This is not and cannot be perfect, right? However, this does give you a way to try and clean things up, to say, oh, I know this one context that could be giving me some kind of bias in my data. Let me remove it. Let me give you an example. San minus Kekan San. Wonder why I would search that. Versus just the word san, versus just the word Kekan. So we can see here that my name, of course, has some effect on the occurrences of the word san, which for context is not very frequent. Let me pop this off real quick. It's not very frequent. It pops up every so often. Frankly, it pops up more often in people breaking up all of the syllables of Kieta Takalu than it does on its own. But that's not really the point. Going back to the more complex graph in relative mode. So here we essentially get all of the occurrences of san that aren't in my name, which is, really handy. It gives us a way, again, to study a particular word without some context, some other phrase mixing it up. And you might have noticed that I'm searching a name here. It is entirely possible to search for names with this tool because the way the scoring algorithm works is just one part of the puzzle. Once a particular entire sentence has passed the test, I continue on to count every single word in that sentence. I don't do any filtering once a match is made. So, what else can we search for then? Well, we can search for names like Sonko, Inli, Siko, Pepu. That is China, English or England, China or Mandarin, English or England, Discord, Facebook. And of course, those are in very, very different scales, right? Like, discussion of English seems to be much more frequent than everything else. And you might be wondering, well, is it discussion of English or is it just discussion of maybe England? I assure you it's discussion of English, and I know that because I can do Toki Inli, Ma Inli next to one another and see Toki Inli definitely makes up most of the uses of the word Inli, or rather the name Inli. I got a question in the chat. Pepu Liseme. That's Facebook, yeah. Excuse me. So there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of really, really cool things that I discovered along the way. Like, for example, Sina Seme versus Sina Pali Seme. So if you've been around the community for long enough, you might know that Sina Pali Seme is a way people, I guess, used to say, how are you doing? Or what are you doing, right? As a sort of like opening to a conversation. That has actually dropped in use over time. And you may be wondering, well, what if it's just part of another sentence, right? We can do another trick here. So I really like this one. this drop down here lets you decide how many words are in the sentences you're counting frequency from. So you can say, oh, I want to ignore all sentences that are just one word, that are just two words, etc. And you can override it on a per phrase basis. So in this context, we can do sina seme minus sina seme underscore 3. And then sina pali seme minus sina pali seme underscore 5. That is to say, the phrase sina seme, except for the times where it's in sentences of length 3 or longer. And then sina pali seme, except for the times that it's in sentences of length 5 or longer. So, in other words, when those two phrases are alone. And we see the same outcome. The phrase sina seme is straight up more common than the phrase sina pali seme, even when you compare them to the two of those phrases just being alone. That's super cool. We basically have a demonstration of one particular way in which community usage has completely changed, in which we now talk about what you're doing in a different way. This is so incredibly cool. And of course, this is not at all the only way that community usage has changed. There are tons of these to be found. I have no hope of finding them all. So if you find a really cool graph, it would be awesome if you would share it around. As a matter of fact, the link up here automatically populates with your query and all the other parameters you had set. So you should be able to just copy the link and send it to people with the exact same query that you just saw. I'd also like to add a little thing where you can like copy a screenshot of the full page and then just like paste it. We got one question. Can you do keen versus keen la? Yes. Keen la. And we can see that keen is enormously popular. It is 0.4% of all of Tokipona. And keen la, more specifically, is a much smaller portion of that, right? If you wanted to make this a bit more fair, now we know that keen la, all the occurrences of keen la are involved in keen here, so we can subtract out keen la. And we get a much more fair comparison. This is all the occurrences of keen without the occurrences of keen la compared to just keen la. I've seen, by the way, a couple of questions about what the deal is with the data from 2016 to about 2020. You may have noticed that the data changes shape a little bit in every graph starting about March 2020. I'll give you a guess. So what happened in March 2020 that might have caused Tokipona to change its complete nature? It was COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic. Everybody sat indoors for a good 2 years, and a lot of people were like, hey, what's the easiest language? Let me learn that. Not literally, of course. So we got the question. I meant keen as a sentence starter like tasso. So unfortunately, something this tool can't do is tell you when something is at the start of a sentence versus being anywhere else. There isn't any way to distinguish that right now. I would like to add that in the future. But for now, there is no way to say, oh, well, what if I wanted to compare the occurrences of this phrase at the start of a sentence versus everywhere else? I actually have thought of a way to do that, but it's not in here yet. I saw one mention of tenpo ku, and actually, I'd like to show you something really, really cool that's related to the periodic phrases thing from before. Pu, ku, and su. So this is a bit noisy. Let me smooth it out a little bit. Actually, that kind of hides the truth. So we can see that the discussion of these words reflects how much people are talking about these specific things. This red line is ku, July 2021, and of course, that's the release of ku itself. Excuse me. So we get, a really clean demonstration of how people are discussing these words and how different events in the community impact what words are being used. You can actually see a similar spike over here in February of 2024, and that is, of course, when Su released. the Tokipona official book about the Wizard of Oz. And gosh, this is just really, really cool to be able to see. Let's see. There was a question I saw. Yeah, okay. So one suggestion to search was Keen Me versus Keen La Me. Now, we run into a problem here, which is that there aren't very many uses of either of these. But there are enough to at least reason about. We can see that there is some occurrence of Keen Me in the data. It is around. People are using it. Keen La Me is a good bit more frequent. You can't really say like twice more frequent. Well, this is in the range of like 20-ish. This is in the range of like 60-ish. So it's around 3 times as frequent as Keen Me, which I think that tracks as far as like anecdotally the way I see people using the language. You get results like this that are very, very interesting, that show you how certain grammatical features are used. Now, there's another one that people probably have questions about. What about Kekan E? Well, we can search for that, and it's around. People are talking about this. People are talking about Kekan, using Kekan this way, especially over on Telegram for that matter. But what if we wanted to compare this to Kekan preposition specifically? Unfortunately, there isn't a clean way to do that, but we can get pretty close because we can do Kekan E compared to Kekan minus Kekan E. And this gives us a pretty realistic presentation of how this data turns out. Kekan E is not all that common. It's certainly around. It would be hard to say it's wrong, but it is definitely less frequent than all of the other occurrences of Kekan. And that's in the absolute mode. We can look in the relative mode as well to get, a percentage. Wow, the chat is popping off with different searches. This is very, very cool to see. This is so exciting. Thank you all for the excitement about this tool. I sincerely hope it really, really helps. So we got one question. Kekan star minus Kekan E. You're getting ahead of me. But sure, I can do that. So one of the features of this tool is wildcard search. You can do a wildcard, one per phrase, so long as it's not at the start of the phrase. And now these take a little longer. Oh my. This exact search is not the most helpful, actually, the way I've done it. Let's just do Kekan star and look at those. Excuse me. But yeah, you can do wildcard searches to see a bunch of words at once. This should be the top 10 words that follow the word you search for. I saw one person asking if they could do regex in this search bar. You cannot. So that's because there isn't actually like a live hosted database behind this data. There is a big SQLite blob. That library I mentioned before with the 4 acronyms in its name, that library is a way to query a SQLite database without needing to download the entire thing ahead of time. Somebody says forbidden pasta. Yeah, this data is a little messy. The smoothing feature can help out, but really when it comes to graphing a lot of different n-grams at the same time, you're going to want to hover the graph and see what order they're in there. And it'll show you the phrase next to its percentage of occurrences. I don't like people calling SQL SQL. I don't know. It was described that way to me by my professors in university. I'm going to keep calling it SQL because that's what I'm used to. Sorry. But other cool things you could study with this. So you could look for what comes after the word ona. The result here, I think, is really funny because, of course, it's Lee. It's not even close. Li is the most common word that occurs after ona. The rest are, of course, around. And there are plenty of reasons why those would be used. It's, if you're a Tokipono speaker, you can look through these and get a pretty good idea of what's going on. Like ona kepeken there in the middle, that's probably a verb that ended with ona and then a preposition that begins with kepeken, right? And the same goes for several of these. Ona lon, ona tawa, ona tan, right? Excuse me. So what else do I have? Well, let me scroll ahead. You can add searches. So, okay, here's the fun one. If I wanted to search for the word toki, but I also wanted to include occurrences of, toki, but from you, Caesar, well, I can do that. Trouble is, toki from you, Caesar is not all that frequent, but it's around. It does a little bit of a bump in this data. We can see, comparing that to just the word toki. This is actually a really, really cool one. In fact, let me just talk about you, Caesar, for a minute. Woo, that's not what I meant. So the you, Caesar data is actually really, really interesting because, of course, you can see a spike right when you, Caesar was encoded, and then it goes pretty quiet. And then all of a sudden in March 2024, it spikes again. Sadly, it's kind of quieted down. I'd like to help that. It's such a cool encoding, but I totally understand it is a huge, huge pain to actually use. But basically, we learn here that whenever people get excited about you, Caesar, it pops up more, right? In March 2024, we made a channel that is specifically for you, Caesar, for using this encoding of Tokipona to discuss whatever you want, right? Oh, goodness. There's a lot going on in the chat. Gosh, I can't keep up. There is some trouble with the Caesar data, which is that a lot of the words aren't really used that often. As a matter of fact, let me make an example of that. I think, so the word monsi, for example, is, according to my search, the least used of all the poo words. And before you ask, I don't know what happened in January. Good luck figuring that out. Yeah, you, Caesar. UCSUR. Sorry. That's worse than sequel. I got it from Teppo. Blame Teppo. I used to say it Uxer, and then Teppo was like, it's you, Caesar. And I was like, oh, okay. Gracious. It's a lot going on. Let's see. What's another fun one? Tenpo ni. This phrase occurs over time. I mean, of course, it occurs over time. But we could remove it from certain contexts that it appears in to see how often it occurs in those contexts versus outside of it. Like we could remove lon tenpo ni, and we could remove tenpo ni la. And wait, what just happened? Let's add back tenpo ni. Whoa. It turns out that almost all of the occurrences of the phrase tenpo ni are either in a lon preposition or in a la phrase. Not all of them. It still happens outside of that context, but most of them. Jan Teppo now blames Jan Lepeka. So, okay. Jan Lepeka is responsible for the pronunciation you, Caesar. And Jan Lepeka is the coordinator of the under conscript Unicode registry. I don't know if I got that right. So, good luck. Ooh, other cool thing. So that's occurrences of tenpo ni. Let's go back to toki and pona. I set this to relative mode. So I discussed this before, how we see that sometimes toki is the most common and pona is the most common. But what if it changed depending on how long your sentences were? Well, there's one really obvious way in which toki would become less common, and that is if we removed sentences of length 1, because of course, toki is used for greetings, right? If we then pop up to specifically 2 plus words per sentence, we see this divide between pona and toki grow even larger, right? And that makes perfect sense. We've just removed all of the occurrences of toki that were in phrases of length 1. And same goes for pona, but there aren't as many of them as there are for toki. Continuing. We go to 3 words per sentence, 4 words per sentence, 5 words per sentence, and 6 words per sentence, and we see something fascinating happen, which is that in these sentences, the word toki is always more common than the word pona. This is fascinating. So, in other words, we learn that in longer sentences, toki is more common than pona. What do we actually interpret from that result? Who knows? But it's so cool that we can now just dig through this data and find things like this. Ooh, Kalaasi points out something that's really fun. Wawa exclamation has been gaining popularity. Yes. So let me pop this up to here. There we go. Yeah. Wawa as interjection, growing. Wawa stonks. We love Wawa interjection. It's lovely. Does mi toki e ni count as a full sentence? Sure. And then if we wanted to be certain we were only looking at it as a sentence alone, we could subtract mi toki e ni 5, and we lose a handful of uses. Is there a way to break apart usages for a word between sources? No. No, there is not, and I do not intend to add that feature, at least not in the near term. And the reason why is because the more detail I add to this data, like for example, what platform did it come from, or even what specific community it comes from, if I did that, it would be way, way too easy to figure out who said what and when. It's already possible in a handful of cases, which is, why it's basically fine that I did everything in public servers. And right now we can hide safely behind the fact that Mapona Pitokipona alone is, significantly larger than all of the other communities, right? So everything that's said there is able to kind of hide all the things that would otherwise be anonymizing, right? I'm not going to give you the power to search specific communities. I can make specific queries out of that information, but I do not feel comfortable or safe giving more specific data in that vein. There are going to be ways in which I improve this data in the future, and I would like to add more communities and platforms, but beyond that, there isn't much to be done as far as disambiguating one platform from another. Sorry about that. I saw one person ask me musi e musi versus just me musi. So me musi e musi appears fairly, not super frequently, but it occurs. And so that's the relative mode. So the smoothing back to 2. Here, let me do this. Mi musi e musi manca, e musi ni, mi musi e musi p versus mi musi star. And of course, there's a lot more of those. We can see that mi musi e musi, the first one that shows up is mi musi e musi manca out of all this data. Of course, again, we've run into an issue where it's kind of a spaghetti, but Wild card for name words by capitalization. So this is another limitation of the data, of the way I'm gathering the data. I do not have a way to give you capitalizations. I do not, everything is lowercase in the database. It would be super, super cool to be able to do that. And I want to do that in the future. But right now, it is not possible. Mi musi e, or mimusi star minus mimusi e. So this works, but the result is a little bit silly. Basically, you search for everything that's mimusi star, and then you subtract out one particular one of them. So you find out in this context that mimusi e is more common than all of these, and so they end up negative. So I've got about 20 minutes left, and I've got a good bit I would like to go look for, or to keep telling you about. Wildcard for stuff that isn't in a list of known Tokipona words. That actually would be cool, and I think I could do that. That would take a little bit of querying effort, but yeah, I could definitely do that. I should clarify that I have been working on this for like 4 months or so, and I would like to take a break from it for a little while. So I will be taking a break for a little while. I this has been quite a while in the making, and I really hope it's useful as is right now. I would like to improve it in the future. I would love to get more querying options in the future, and I will be doing so, but I'm a rest for a while. So let's go back to the actual presentation. So slideshow. What's up with the dip? It turns out this dip is a lesson in community management. So I showed you this graph at the very, very start, where if you search Toki, Pona, and Toki Pona, you get this big dip down the middle in February of 2023 through August of 2023. And the reason for this is kind of silly. So it's my fault. It is specifically my fault. I did this. And okay, I should clarify that in the most technical sense, it was the consensus of the mod team. We had several discussions about this, but it is ultimately my fault because I was arguing for this specifically. So let me back up to the actual thing that was going on. Toward the beginning of February 2023, the mods and I were looking at the category of Tokipona Tasso channels that existed at that time, and we were seeing a lot of the following exchange. One person would go, Toki. Another person would come along 30 minutes later and say, Toki, sinapilin seme. And then yet another person would come along who didn't see either of the other two when they sent their message, and they would say, Mipilin pona sinaseme, and that would be the end of the conversation because none of these three people ever saw one another. We saw this pattern repeating over and over in basically all of the Tokipona Tasso channels. And I thought to myself and argued for us to reduce the number of channels in the category. We were at the time diagnosing the problem as being, oh, well, people just aren't seeing each other because there's so many channels. Some of us were in agreement that the category was kind of intimidating, kind of difficult to get into. And both of those things are true. Like, it's true that the category is intimidating and people weren't seeing each other, but the solution we chose turned out to be very, very wrong because we, like I said, archived several channels. And the channels we chose to archive were, of course, the topic-specific ones. We archived, at the time, the math discussion channel, the game channel, the language channel. One person asks, does the data include archived channels? Yes, so long as the archived channels are publicly accessible. But yeah, so we archived all of these channels and we wouldn't really learn our mistake until basically when I made this graph, made Ilo Muni, because it turned out that this act single-handedly drops the usage of Tokipona by almost 50%. Everywhere. Now, granted, there are other platforms that are not included in this data, but I feel, weird about this fact that a misguided decision we made had this level of impact on the data. Now, of course, the way Mapona Tokipona is currently designed is a lot better for Tokipona. But there are some lessons to be learned from this decision, from this funky dip in the graph that appears, right? Excuse me. So I guess I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but the lesson I take away is that if you would like to form a Tokipono community, you need to have something to talk about. It is not enough to create a medium. It is not enough to have the language. And it is not enough to just make a channel. You have to have something to talk about. Yandeni is currently complaining about the fact that Mapona is too central. And while I agree in principle, this isn't the problem. Mapona matters. That is inescapable. But the problem is even Mapona fails, and where Mapona fails, every other community fails worse. All of them. There are exceedingly few communities where there is something to talk about. Definitely all the time. And you know what? That's difficult. Like, I learned this cool, funny language with so few words because I thought the language itself was interesting. And then I spent months and months talking about the language. And from there, where did it go next? Now I know this language and I have lots of friends that I know via the language. But what are we all talking about? What interests do we have in common? Well, linguistics is one. Math is clearly another. Plenty of us play games together. There's the entire VR chat community where we just hop on and check out cool things in VR chat. And that I love to pieces. It really is critical that you have something to talk about. I don't know what that something is for you or your community, but at a bare minimum, if you're designing a community from first principles, you should start with channels that tell you what to talk about. Have a channel for games. Have a channel for, your dog, for critters you see. Have a channel for travels or any number of other things, right? Have a channel for whatever topics. Try not to make it overwhelming, but have things to talk about. And if you're the leader of that community, talk about it. Like, seriously, a lot of Tokipono communities get by. They exist because one person came along and said, why don't we do a thing? And then they started doing that thing, right? Ma musi pi Tokipona. Denny just dropped it in the chat. Let's go. Excuse me. I'm terrible at this. I'm so sorry. Many waso alana. I'm sorry about that. But yeah, Ma musi exists for a specific purpose. And true to form, Alana is very active in that community and encourages people to play games there all the time. It's awesome. I love it. There are, meetup servers for various segments of the world. I have one for the Southeast US. Ultimately, find things to talk about, right? If you're doing something really cool and your first instinct is to talk about it in English, hi, I'm talking about Muni in English, although I did talk about it in Tokipono last night. If your first instinct is to talk about something in English, but you know somebody who'd be interested and could speak to you about it in Tokipona, try it. You get better by practicing, right? Anyway, a couple more things to talk about. Why did I do all of this? Couple of things. Unicode. We really want to get Sita Lampona in Unicode That means we need to know what words to include in the first place, and it means we need to prove Tokipona exists. There are tons and tons of people out there who have no idea our speaking community exists, even if they know the language exists. There are tons of people who, unfortunately, will turn our language into you know, a cutesy marketing opportunity. Like, oh, the easiest language, oh, the smallest language. Like, okay. But I do think we should be able to do that on our own terms, right? We should be able to say what Tokipona is and what it means to us. Because we are the speaking community of Tokipona, right? Other reasons I did this. It's really fun. This whole project was enormously fun. It was incredibly cool to see the data take shape. It was incredibly cool to see, you know, what sort of interesting things, like things I expected, things I did not expect. I had no idea that the word penpo had become more popular than the word kokosila as far as the recent past. That's fascinating. That's so cool. That word a little bit exists because of me. I didn't make the word, but you know, my efforts to get tenpo pitoke pona taso in mapona led to that word being made, and it was super, super funny. Love that. It's so cute. Last reason I did this is pedagogy. We have a new way we can study Tokipona. This tool, I hope, can give you some insight into not just, you know, oh, I feel like the word is used this way. I feel like it occurs in this context. We can actually study the data directly. We can make a search. And of course, there's all sorts of caveats to exactly how that is done, right? Like the graphs aren't perfect. The data isn't perfect. But we have something really, really close to reality. Oh, people are asking what penpo means. So, it is a silly sounding shortening of P Tokipona taso, or maybe it just exists to rhyme with tenpo. It kind of stands in for the phrase Tokipona taso wherever it's used. It's very, very uncommon in the sense of, like, you know, the grand scheme of things or whatever you'd like to call it. But that is basically the idea. It means Tokipona taso. So if you're talking about ilo pi Tokipona taso, you could call that ilo penpo. And this is just one silly way it occurs, of course. I understand there's a segment on the schedule coming up that's called Nasin Tenpo Penpo. Similar idea. Anyway, closing thoughts. Okay, so this is actually really, really important to me. I did not need to spend any money to create Ilo Muni. And I took that as an explicit design constraint. I didn't pay any money for compute or web hosting or database hosting. The database is literally just a blob database that I published directly to GitHub, and you can download it straight from there and see the rest of the data that isn't possible to view directly in Ilo Muni. And the reason why I took this as a design constraint is because I want to demonstrate that there is a lot of, I don't know what word to use. There is a lot that the community can do, even if we need to be small and scrappy and go to a lot of effort. There is a lot of work we can do without needing to spend money, without needing to, you know, compete with whatever weird marketing interests that exist on places like YouTube, We don't need to play games, as it were. All I did for this project was use publicly available free resources and my laptop, which is it's a ThinkPad. I got it for like $100 on eBay because about every 3 years businesses sell off tons of their business class laptops. Somebody's found one of my silly comments in the README. Yeah, businesses sell off their laptops about every 3 years, and you can just buy them for really, really cheap. Other than that, which is, a thing I have to be on the computer at all. That's that for that point. So, ton of work that I want to do to improve Elo Muni. Man, I'm a little bit short on time. So, in short, I would like to improve the way I measure units of time. I would like to make it possible to query words regardless of their capitalization rather than right now where they're all in lowercase. There's a bunch of issues open that are on all the different libraries I made that will show you what I want to do to improve things. And of course, I already discussed this point, but if you want to make and grow a Tokepono community, you need something to talk about. And I guess I should have added this on here too, but you also need to be involved in your community. You can't just make the box and hope it works. You need to convince people to show up by talking in that community. If you haven't already found it, here is the link. Excuse me. Gracious, I've been talking for a while. And I will go ahead and drop that. For everyone who didn't already find it. Oops. And okay, there's a help page that will reiterate a lot of the suggestions I made for ways you can search, how you can search, talks about the bias that's possible, talks about interpreting graphs, tons of other things. There's more I want to add to that help page as well. That's all. I believe that is everything. Yeah, I don't really have another conclusion here. Thank you so much for tuning in, for listening. I sincerely hope this is helpful. And that you can learn something really, really cool from Elo Muni, and that you learned more than just from Elo Muni. You learned how communities work and form in Tokepona, in this broader Tokepona community. Thank you all so much, and have fun in the next segment.